I'll briefly review the logistics for the meeting. All directors and staff have unmuted lines. In order to reduce background noise, please mute your lines while you are listening. When speaking, please begin by stating your name, and you might want to unmute your phone. For votes on actions, I will call out each director individually to record his or her vote. For members of the public and representatives of the city and covered organizations, your lines are muted. We are able to unmute individual lines for any questions directed to entity officials in attendance as we proceed with the meeting. Due to the circumstances of holding this meeting by conference call, we will not be holding the usual public comment session at the end of the meeting. Any comments should be submitted to the Buffalo Fiscal Stability Authority, either by phone or email. Contact information is available at the website. At this time, I will ask Nikita Fortune to indicate who is on this call.
Good afternoon. We have all BFSA staff on the line. We also have Jim McGavern and Richard Grimm, BFSA counsel. We have Council Member Brian Bowman, Council Member Rashid Wyatt, Delano Dahl from the City Comptroller's Office, Bill Ferguson, Comptroller's Office. We have WBFO Radio, and I see someone from Buffalo City School District and City of Buffalo. I have two other unidentified callers. If I have not stated your name, please state your name for the call.
Donna Estrich.
Hi, Donna.
Hello, good afternoon.
Could we have our unidentified callers identify themselves?
Hi, it's Bill Ferguson from the city.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ferguson.
What branch of the city is Bill Ferguson from?
Bill is the city accountant.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
On our agenda today Go ahead.
Excuse me, Niels. This is Jeanette.
No problem.
Do we have a representative from the school district, or who's on the line from the district? Sorry, I thought I heard Nikita say that we did have someone present.
I thought I did too.
I did see someone on the line present from the school district, but it looks like they may have left the call.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Okay, well, I guess we'll address that when we get to their plan.
I'm sorry,
is anyone else getting a weird
this
clicking
is Jeanette
feedback?
Robe. I was just going to ask if anybody else is hearing that. If maybe we can
Yes, I am.
everybody, if everyone can maybe mute their phones if you're not talking, and we'll see if that takes care of it.
I thought you had a metronome.
Right? That's what it sounds like. That is going to be very...
Well, we'll just talk over it, I guess.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hopefully it goes away soon.
Yeah, it's very annoying. It's terrible.
Okay, on our agenda today is the review of the 2020-21 budgets and the 2021-24 financial plans as submitted by the mayor to BFSA on May 1st. This review will include the Buffalo City School District, the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency, and the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. A revised financial plan has been requested from the mayor for the city of Buffalo and will be reviewed at a later date, although we might want to get a little more precision on when that will occur when we get to it. Let's begin today's meeting with Secretary Arthur taking the roll call of the directors, please.
Chairman Olson.
Present.
Vice Chair Druzak.
Present.
Director Floss.
Present.
Secretary Arthur is present. Ex officio Mayor Brown.
Present.
Ex officio County Executive Mark Polenkars. or representative? Mr. Chairman, we have
Benjamin Swanacamp on the, I'm sorry, is Benjamin Swanacamp on the line?
Say that again?
I wasn't sure if we had somebody from the county executive's office on the line. I didn't pick up on that one.
Okay.
Didn't sound like it.
No, no one answered, but Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum is present.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, George, as always. Let's begin with our first item of business, which is to approve the minutes from the meetings held on March 23rd, 2020, and April 14th, 2020. Directors will find a draft of those minutes and the accompanying resolutions in your board book under tab 1. We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any requested additions or deletions of the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Our next item of Jeanette, should I have George call off the names when we vote, or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, we have one resolution. That being said, when we lose Fred, we're not going to have quorum for that resolution any longer. Yeah, and I don't think we're going to get through everything by the time he leaves. This is the draft resolution on the financial plan.
If I can interrupt for 1 second, this is Nikita Fortune. I just got a notification that Benjamin Swanacamp is on the line. Mr. Swanacamp, can you identify yourself, please?
Guess not.
Do you think it would make sense to end this call and all call back into the line again to see if we can get rid of this clicking noise?
It's okay with me.
Say what?
Yeah.
Do what?
If we all hang up and call back in, and hopefully we can get rid of the
in.
clicking
Okay.
noise. Okay. Sorry, everybody. I don't know what else to try.
No problem. Keep us honest, George. Okay, so we'll all go back.
So I have to hang up and dial back because there's disturbance on.
You should be fine, Director Jurasek. This is Nikita. The clicking noise has stopped. Whoever had that on their line has left the call.
Oh, good.
Oh, all right.
So
okay.
hopefully.
So we're back.
Yes.
Thank you, Nikita.
You're welcome. I have Olson, Jurasek. Let's see. City of Buffalo. I'm not sure who that is. 8 attendees
I
so
should be
far.
down there probably.
Secretary Arthur is back on the line. Elaine O'Dowell is back on the line. Claire from BFSA, Nathan Miller from BFSA. Councilmember Bowman, Rich Grimm. WBFO is back on the line.
Okay, are we all set? Hello? Hello? I seem to have lost my call, but I'm back. No, but I got a call that must have been from Nikita, which I answered and got in. But now I seem to be off on the landline I was using, but I'm talking to you on this.
I apologize. WBFO was calling. They were in and out. Something was going on with the software, it looks like.
Yeah, anytime you take care of anything these days.
Give us maybe about a few more minutes, because I saw them pop up.
Claire Waldron.
George Arthur.
Rich Grimm.
Jeanette Joyce.
WBFO Radio.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm back. Who's on?
Hi, Donna Estrich.
Hi, Donna.
Gavin here.
Jeanette Joyce here.
Okay, it sounds like everybody's back.
Councilmember Wyatt.
Gillian Brown.
Hi, Gillian.
Hi, Jared.
Delano Dow.
George, should we do a quick canvas again, or you think we're okay?
Jeanette Robe. Well, at least the clicking is gone.
Clicking's gone, and it seems like everybody is back, so maybe we can begin again.
Yep. This is Ben Swanikamp. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes, you can.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. So we have quorum.
Okay, so I think we're all set.
Great.
So with everyone's approval, we'll go back to the order of business here. And our next item of business is to review the Buffalo City School District's 2020-21 proposed budget and related four-year financial plan, along with a summary of the third quarter report. Any changes made to the submission pursuant to adoption of the budget by the Buffalo Board of Education will be subsequently reviewed by BFSA at the June meeting. The BFSA reports on these items have been provided under tab 2 of your board books. Nathan, hi, I'm back. Okay, good. Nathan has prepared an overview of these items for us. Nathan, please begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. The following is a review of the Buffalo City School District's fiscal year 2019-2020 third quarter results. As I go through these presentations, I'll begin by notating what slide that they're on so it'll be easier for people to follow along. Slide number 2. All district schools closed on March 13th as a result of the pandemic. Following that, on May 1st, the governor extended the order for the remainder of the school year. During this closure, all employee groups have received regular salary and benefits, with the exception of the substitute teachers who are now on unemployment insurance. Bus aides are not working but continue to receive weekly salary based on an average work days of pay. Slide number 3. Slide number 3, just one moment, please. Slide number 3, revenues and expenditures have been deeply impacted by the pandemic. The following table demonstrates how significantly the current fiscal year projections have changed. The slide shows the projection at mid-year and then again at the end of the third quarter. While revenues are projected to be unfavorable at fiscal year end by $4.3 million, expenditures are projected to be favorable now by $44.5 million. Overall, the surplus is projected to be $40 million on a budgetary basis and with an actual $30 million surplus. Slide number 4. Revenues are projected to be unfavorable by $4.3 million at current fiscal year end. Part of this is due to a $3.3 million unfavorable variance for New York State aid. That's based on more up-to-date information. Pupil count expenditures from the prior fiscal year. Significantly, Erie County sales tax was projected to be favorable at fiscal year end, and at mid-year it is now projected to be unfavorable by $1.5 million, and that is a direct result of the economic downturn. Slide number 5, expenditures are projected to be significantly lower at current. Again, we're on slide number 5. This slide shows how the school's closures has impacted the district's expenditures. Total employee compensation and benefits are now projected to be a combined $24.7 million favorable at fiscal year end. Payments to charter schools would be favorable by 1.4, and then on the slide you can see that transportation was budgeted at $51 million approximately and is now projected to be favorable by 15.2. And that is a direct result of the school's closure and the subsequent lack of the need for busing the kids to the schools and back. Slide number 6. This table depicts budgeted and actual positions filled at March 31st. Shows it both on an all funds and a general fund basis. The general fund has significant vacancy rate of 105 full-time equivalent employees, or about 2.2%. Slide number 7. This is a summary of all of the analysis that went into the report. The adopted budget included a $10 million deficit. The current fiscal year projection is now a budgetary surplus of $40 million with an actual surplus of $30 million. I won't go through every line, but as noted, the pandemic has had a significant impact on the district as well as everything else in the world. And finally, slide number 8. The vacancy rate was noted at 2.2% at March 31st. That is the reason why the variances are projected within the employee compensation and the employee benefit lines. Overall, the fiscal year projections are pretty conservative for the district. And that concludes my overview of the third quarter financial results. If there's any questions to that, I can speak to them. Hearing none. Mr. Chair, did you want me to continue with the budget and financial plan overview? I hadn't heard that part earlier. Sorry.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. Slide number 9. The following is an analysis of the district's 2021 recommended budget and their 21-24 financial plan. Slide 10. The 1920 recommended budget and 2024 financial plan was submitted to the BFSA on May 1st, 2020. The district planned to review the recommended budget and financial plan tonight. We just received notice earlier that the actual review will be next week in a special meeting. That's an update to the slide here. The recommended budget includes a budgeted deficit of $50 million. That deficit is closed via the utilization of fund balance. A budget gap has been projected for each fiscal year of the financial plan for a cumulative 4-year budget gap of $219.9 million.
Jason, may I ask a question?
Yes.
What did the council recommend for the budget for the school board?
We had not received a recommendation from the Common Council. They did review it. I would have to defer to the school district for actual.
Let me ask Donna, did the council adopt the budget yet?
Sorry, I was on mute.
Chair,
no, they have not. They have not adopted a budget.
They have not. Did they do any indications as to what they're going to recommend?
Not that I'm aware of yet.
What's their deadline?
The law department has opined that they may have until June 6th due to the pause. So I'm not sure what they chose to do. I believe they are having a meeting tomorrow to extend it from May 21st to June 6th.
To June 6th?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Slide number 10, the recommended budget and financial plan. We've covered the first point there. It was submitted to us on May 1st. Slide number 11, New York State's finances have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting coronavirus recession. The New York State 2021 enacted budget includes what's called a pandemic adjustment. It was a clawback of state aid sent out to all local schools and local authorities. The Buffalo City School District's pandemic adjustment was $29.6 million, which was then backfilled through a federal CARES restoration, what's known as a CARES restoration in the exact amount. The Federal CARES Act restoration of $1.13 billion brings the total New York's aid of $27.4 billion to $24.7 billion, slightly higher than the prior year's authorized appropriation. Slide number 12. The level of New York State aid can be reduced further from what has already been provided within the New York State enacted budget. Now, the state budget includes what are known as measurement periods. The first one is April 1st through April 30th, then May 1st through June 30th, and then July 1st through December 30th. During any of these periods, measurement periods, if it's been determined that revenues did not meet budgeted expectations or expenditures are higher, then the New York State Director of the Budget is authorized to determine whether the budget is imbalanced and additional state aid cuts can be made. The revised spending plan would include, at current estimate, $8.2 billion in reductions in aid to localities. The district has quantified what the impact would be here. The impact on the Buffalo City School District with this high of a reduction would be $110 million in the 2021 fiscal year. Slide number 13. New York State finances have been deeply impacted by the pandemic and the recession. The financial plan, therefore, includes deficit closing and cost savings initiatives to address the budgetary gaps over these out years. These are many of the actions that we reviewed recently at the March 2020 board meeting. It's been revised and updated to include the new forecast deficit in the out years. These actions include savings through efficiencies, increased revenues, and an increased reliance on fund balance. It demonstrates the methods available to close the out-year budgetary gaps in the event that additional revenues and or savings from efficiencies are inadequate to address these budgetary gaps. And then it's noted that several of these actions have been implemented or slated to be enacted within the 2021 fiscal year. These results are incorporated right into the 2021 budget. Slide number 14, the BFSA had several key observations when performing the analysis. The first of which is that general fund revenues increase at a CAGR of 0.8% over the financial plan. Expenditures increase at a CAGR of 0.06. However, expenditures start at a higher level than revenues, and that's what is driving budgetary gaps in each fiscal year of the plan. Next point is that revenues include a New York State pandemic adjustment of $29.6 million in 2021. This decrease is offset in that year by the same amount in federal CARES restoration. However, each out year does include an additional assumption of pandemic adjustments, and this is based on prior experience during the 2007-2009 Great Recession. New York State enacted what was called a gap elimination adjustment. It was backfilled through federal aid in the first 2 years, but then it continued out for several years beyond that. And so this assumption of additional pandemic adjustments is based on the prior experience where that occurred. Slide number 15. The district has budgeted the appropriation of $50 million of fund balance in the fiscal year 2021 recommended budget.
Excuse me. I'm sorry. This is Nikita.
Yes.
It looks like there is a problem on the website. Is anyone else still on the call?
I'm on the call.
Okay.
I'm on the call.
I am.
Yep. I'm on.
Ability to see the meeting. So I just wanted to make sure you were still reporting to the board and the public. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita. Okay. The next slide is slide number 16. And this continues BFSA's key observations for the analysis. All collective bargaining units have labor agreements that are either expired or are scheduled to expire over the financial plan. The next is that many of the cost drivers that the district has had are at rates of reduced rate of increase over the financial plan. This includes health insurance for both active and for retirees, as well as the pension liability. Finally, the implementation and continuation of various efficiency initiatives, along with the additionally available fund balance, will begin to address the projected out-year budget gaps, but will be insufficient to fully close the gap based on what has been presented in the financial plan. The plan does include various cost reduction actions, including program and staffing cuts, which are reflected to close the remaining gaps. We'll look at that in a little more detail in a moment. Number 17, continuing with our key observations, the district had intended to be operational balanced in fiscal year 2021. This, of course, is no longer planned due to the recession that we're currently in. Each fiscal year of the financial plan has a projected deficit of anywhere between $45.3 million up to $64.8 million. Slide number 18. This is a table that depicts the 4-year revenues and expenditures. As I noted, the overall deficit over the 4 years is close to $220 million. Fiscal year 2021 reduces the $50 million projected deficit to zero through the use of appropriated fund balance. It's the only fiscal year of the financial plan that includes appropriation of fund balance. The deficits included each year afterward total $169.9 million. That represents the amount that would need to be filled by additional gap closing actions. Slide 19. This table represents the district's general fund revenues over the financial plan. I don't know if this speaks to Secretary Arthur, what you had mentioned about the Common Council. The real property tax, the city's contribution to the district has remained static at the prior fiscal year's level of $70.8 million and is projected to remain static across the financial plan. As noted, because of the recession, Erie County sales tax is now budgeted at $44 million, which is significantly less than the prior fiscal year, and increases $2.5 million or 5.7% over the financial plan. It's not forecast to return to prior fiscal year levels over the next 4 years of the plan. As noted, New York State aid is lower than the prior fiscal year at $651.1 million. There is a pandemic adjustment assumed in every year. There's federal CARES restoration of close to $30 million in the next fiscal year, but not assumed in any of the out years of the plan. Overall, general fund revenues are at a level that is lower than 1920 and increases $22.9 million over the financial plan. So year 3 is the fiscal year where revenues are budgeted to equal, roughly equivalent to what they were budgeted at in 1920. Slide number 20. This slide depicts general fund expenditures in the recommended budget and the financial plan. While revenues are lower than the prior fiscal year, expenditures are higher, which is the onset of the budgetary gaps. The 2021 recommended budget includes $954.7 million in expenditures. This increases 18.2% over the financial plan to $972.9 million. Slide number 21. The following depicts general fund compensation expenditures in the recommended budget and the financial plan. It also includes the budgeted staffing. The staffing is an increase of 68 full-time equivalent employees from 1920 to 2021, and then decreases by 77 full-time equivalent employees over the financial plan. The decrease is based solely on the budgeted number of teachers. The district plans to reduce the number of budgeted teachers over the financial plan, making adjustments based on what they have forecast pupil counts to be. So as district enrollment drops, less budgeted teachers could be included. Slide number 22. This chart depicts district historical staffing from fiscal year 14-15 all the way through the end of the financial plan. The number of full-time equivalent employees budgeted is the highest in 2021. It's the highest since BFSA's inception in 2003 on a general fund basis at 4,901 employees, full-time equivalent employees. Slide number 23. BFSA conducted a contract settlement scenario similar to the one that we did a year ago. They took some base assumptions and looked at the contracts that were expired or would be expired and what a conservative estimate of settling these contracts could be over the next 4 years, less, including the impact on the fringe benefits and less some assumption of hypothetical savings through various concessions. And the net of that was $30.1 million over the 4 years. Okay. Slide number 24, as I just mentioned, the district does forecast a declining pupil count over the next 4 years. This chart shows what overall Buffalo resident pupil public school population would be. So overall, pupil counts are flat at 42,500. However, within district schools, the population would decrease as the population increases in the charter schools. The assumption is that it's a one-to-one increase from one to the other.
Charter schools. Can I ask you a question quick? So the assumptions here are there won't be any social distancing, that class sizes won't be spread out, or hours and days changed. So none of the things that everyone's talking about are in these estimates. I just want to be clear, because obviously if you had to put half the number of people in each class, you're going to need more teaching staff to be able to do that, to teach the same number of students. Is that addressed anywhere?
The pupil counts are based on a full-time equivalent count. I have not been privy to what their specific plans are to reopen. I believe that's a lot of that is still in draft and being discussed, how that would do. But as far as the pupil counts themselves, it's a per pupil equivalent. So whether it's half a class at one time and half a class right afterward, the equivalent count would be the same. But no, that has not been conveyed, the specific plan.
Well, but I mean, you have a certain number of students, you have a certain amount of requirements of hours that they have to be taught. At this point, the fundamental question from a health and safety standpoint is that you're either going to have to put children going in till 8 or 9 o'clock at night and expanding the days, teaching on Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, there are a lot of different models being discussed, but all of those models are terms and conditions and mandatory subjects of negotiation, so they'd have to be negotiated with whatever unions were performing all of these. But from a financial standpoint, I don't understand. I mean, I guess my question is, what do we view, given all of that, this financial plan?
Director Floss, this is Jeanette Robe. You bring up very, very good questions, things that I think we're probably all wondering, especially as we're looking at what's going to happen with the academic year next year. This financial plan was developed as if things go back to normal. That might not be the right answer in a month from now, as these plans are developed and there's a better sense directionally of what's going to unfold. At such time, a revised financial plan would be necessary. We would be talking with the district to get that submitted to us so we could review it. I think the district, I feel comfortable saying that the district developed this budget based on the most reasonable approach that was available to it right now, not knowing what the answer to all these very complex questions are. So it's a situation that they're monitoring. I know we, of course, as the Fiscal Stability Authority, will be monitoring and revising estimates as necessary. I hope that answers your question.
I guess I just want to be careful if we know that they're going to be revised, that we don't make recommendations to either the city or the school district, which will make it harder for them to comply as we go and we make revisions to all of these. So I would just hope that we would take some of this into consideration, that any of the recommendations that we make now at least be considered tentative and not binding recommendation, or pushing people to make decisions without coming back to the BFSA staff and discussing the implications as these all change. The other thing, obviously, I'm hoping that both the city and the school district, all the covered organizations do, that we do scenarios so that in the short period of time that we're going to have when we get some clarity on this, that we're ready to put some plan into place. I know in talking to Donna and others that they have been doing this kind of scenario analysis. I'm pretty sure that the school district is, but I think that maybe our recommendation needs to make sure that those are in place and maybe being shared with us in private to be able to understand a little bit more about what's going on.
Thank you. I have recorded those comments. Thank you.
And this is now, I believe we've communicate clearly both with the city and the district that this is a moving target and that we will be considering future plans as the picture clarifies. Clearly, without a clear understanding of how they're going to reopen, how the schools are going to reopen, it's not possible to have a very clear understanding of what the cost is going to be and what the number of instructional personnel is going to need to be to cover that. So, consistent with Fred's concerns, I think we'll be meeting and considering these changes as they occur. Clearly, one of the biggest problems is the uncertainty of federal and state funding and sales tax revenue. So we're going to be looking at that, obviously, as well. Any other questions? Nathan, can you resume?
Certainly. We are on slide number 25. An item that has been requested before was to take a look at what the population growth has been in the charter schools. We are prepared to give a much greater, more expansive review of that, but this chart here is a depiction of the historical count up until the current fiscal year and then out through the financial plan. Just give me one moment. I'm waiting for my computer to cooperate. On that note, there were two charter schools which opened in 1920 and 3 that have been approved for 2021. There is one charter that may not be reauthorized in 2021. This financial plan had not assumed that it would close. That's a very recent development, but that just to give some flavor of the current updates on that front.
I expect there'll be litigation on that will prolong the question of the continued existence of that school.
Slide number 26, this table depicts the district's projected revenues, expenditures, and the budgetary gaps. Below those lines include the various gap closing actions. The first of which is the additional use of fund balance, which would be as high as $38 million in 21-22, down to $15 million in 23-24. The summation of those 3 years would be as high as $85 million. Additional revenue of $0.3 million for a cumulative $0.9 million over the 3 years. The various efficiencies and savings, $6.4 million in 21-22, all the way through 23-24 for a cumulative of $20.7 million. And then the final one is a new item that has not been listed previously to this magnitude. All other cost reductions beginning at $40.5 million in 21-22, up to $41.5 million in 23-24 for a cumulative of $123 million impact. If you look at the revised baseline gap in each year, that gap can be reduced through the fund balance, through the other revenue, through efficiencies and savings. It cannot be closed by the summation of those first 3 without tipping into other cost reductions, assuming that the revenues are where they're at and the expenditures are where they're at. We'll get a closer examination of those in a moment. Slide number 27. The additional use of up to $85 million of fund balance. Fund balance is currently projected to total $203.6 million at fiscal year end 23-24. Now, if this gap action were implemented to the $85 million amount, the deficit closing action would therefore make total fund balance total $118.6 million at the end of that fiscal year. The financial plan does depict the ability to use this amount of fund balance, and that was just outlined in the previous slide. Slide number 28. This begins the portion of the gap closing plan which has been included in previous plans. BFSA recently examined the other revenue as well as the cost savings initiatives and efficiencies. This was reviewed in the March 2020 meeting, so I'll briefly go over them and answer any additional questions, but I don't want to belabor the point since it's so fresh and has not changed. Other revenue, this is a revenue enhancement aid maximization program. It has yielded results in the past. The cumulative increase in the 1920 budget is a little over $7 million. The actions are conservative at $0.3 million annually for a cumulative close to $1 million of additional savings over the financial plan on top of what has already been achieved and incorporated into the plan. The net of slide number 29, the net of the savings to be achieved through efficiencies is a 3-year total of $20.7 million. This includes the assumption of the vacancies of $2 million a year, additional savings for health care, retiree teacher costs, the examination of the vendors on the following slide, reductions in overtime, savings with public transportation. This is a new item, which is $2 million annually, increasing $300,000 a year for a cumulative of $6.9 million. Potentially, these savings could be made by changing the busing system and splitting everything into 3 zones, thereby achieving an efficiency and a cost savings. And as mentioned, previously included reductions in compensated leave time. Slide number 23 is the final all-cost reductions of $123 million. The district included 3 gap-closing measures to provide cost reductions in the event that these are necessary. These reductions include the reduction of the general contingency account, which is $1.5 million annually and $6 million over the financial plan. It does dip into non-mandated programs for $250,000 annually. The largest portion of this, of course, is a reduction of central office instructional and support positions listed at $38.75 million annually for a cumulative of $116.25 million. That would be the last resort, but that is what's been listed within the financial plan to potentially close those 3-year out-year budgetary gaps. If there are no further questions on that, I'll defer to the Executive Director for slide number 33, our conclusions.
Thank you, Nathan. First, I just want to thank you, Nathan, for the summary and for the great work analyzing this financial plan. It's complex. It's particularly complex this year considering everything that's going on with the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you for summarizing that. So the starting point of our analysis is to evaluate and understand the key underlying assumptions as applied during the development of the budget. Understanding that, we then look at the out years, and the out years of the financial plan are projected using consistent assumptions adjusted for known or estimated changes. One notable adjustment to the key assumptions is the assumed annual reduction of teaching positions.
Jeanette, can you speak a little bit more into the mic, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me any better? I took my phone off conference. Can you hear me?
You're clear to me.
Okay.
Clear to me.
Okay. Let me turn my volume up a little bit. Maybe that's the problem. Okay. So as I was saying, the one notable adjustment to the key assumptions is the assumed annual reduction of teaching positions, which is due to the expected increase in the number of district students enrolling in charter schools. The assumption is that there will be a reduction of 6.5 teachers for every 100 students that leave district schools and enroll in charter schools. The financial impact over the financial plan for this assumption, the key underlying assumption, is a cumulative reduction to employee compensation expenditures of $20 million. That's the first point. And then the second point is that there has been a change from past budgeting practices as it relates to state aid for nursing services. This is, well, the district has received an annual non-competitive award from the state for the past many years for nursing services in the amount of $1.2 million annually. In past financial plans, this was included as part of the gap closing plan as potential other revenue sources to help close budget gaps, and it was done that way in the past as the district took the position that because it had required, and it continues to require, annual reauthorization by the state and was not automatic, that it couldn't be relied upon and was speculative, and therefore it was not part of the budget document itself. Beginning with the budget year 2021, the district has included the $1.2 million as estimated revenue. It's not significant dollar-wise when you're looking at the budget as a whole, but it is one notable change from last year, so I did want to highlight that for you. I'm going to pause just to make sure everybody can hear me.
Anybody have a problem hearing?
No, that's good.
Okay. Thank you. There's been too many conversations. I've been talking to a blank phone in the past, so just want to make sure you're still there. Slide number 34, the second conclusion slide. New York State's finances have been deeply impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting recession. As Nathan reviewed, the New York State budget includes a pandemic adjustment, which reduces the amount of state aid by the amount of federal stimulus provided for education purposes. This amount is $29.6 million for 2020-21. The district has included pandemic adjustments at declining levels over the financial plan, with the cumulative amount of $46 million reflected over the financial plan. There is no assumption of federal stimulus coming to the school district after the current budget, the new budget year of 2020-21. This projection appears to be reasonable based on the current information that we're looking at this time. The district has identified a risk that has not been built into this financial plan, which is a further reduction to state aid. The state has indicated that it expects to close a budget gap with $8.2 billion of reductions in funding to localities. A plan has not yet been released by the New York State Director of the Budget. There was a date of May 15th at one point, but that was not released last Friday. A 20% reduction to state aid would represent a $110 million impact to the district. Next slide, to summarize, the four-year budget gap that's included in the financial plan is $219.9 million. The district closes the gap for the new budget year by including $50 million in fund balance to fill the budget gap for 2020-21. The final out years of the gap contain budget gaps which will be closed through the implementation of the various gap closing measures as reviewed by Nathan. These include allocating additional fund balance, additional revenues and cost savings through various programs and initiatives, and cost reductions that are largely attained through staffing cuts. The financial plan demonstrates that the out-year budget gaps can't be closed without staffing reductions, and that is a significant shift from what we have seen in prior financial plans by the district. The district adjusts the plan annually or more as appropriate to reflect changing circumstances and priorities of the Board of Education, and the impact on the district from the pandemic will be more transparent as time progresses. Moving to slide number 36, the current financial plan maintains the staffing plan. There's a net increase of 69 full-time equivalent positions in the general fund compared to last year. The budget number at 4,901 positions represents the highest level of budgeted positions since 2003 when BFSA was created. On an all funds basis, it's consistent. There's a decrease of 6 budgeted positions compared to last year. The next slide, the projected unassigned fund balance as it exists in this financial plan and excluding any additional potential draws on fund balance. So just what's in the body of the financial plan, it exceeds the Board of Education's retainage policy of 4% by $41.2 million at the conclusion of the 4-year period, which is June 30th, 2024. This amount is projected without considering, as I said, the additional use of fund balance in the remaining years. If that occurs, fund balance could be significantly depleted over the financial plan. And it's important to note that due to the financial circumstances anticipated over this financial plan, there is no replenishment of fund balance provided and would need to be considered by the district in future years. Brings me to slide number 38. The financial plan does not include assumed salary and wage increases for expired labor agreements, and I know that's a point that this board has discussed over the years. It is recommended that the district build these estimated costs into the financial plan to understand the district's total financial needs, which even more so is more necessary now than even before. The largest contract being the teachers, it expired a year ago on June 30th, 2019. To let you know the carve-out of what's available for negotiations, there is $9 million in assigned fund balance, and there's a small amount that Nathan went through and analyzed and calculated of $3.5 million in the budget itself. Very minor. The amount provided falls short of BFSA estimates by $17.6 million. And the final slide, that is the final slide. I apologize.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay, discussion?
This is Ben Swanekamp. That initial sales tax number for this fiscal year, you said that was a $1.5 million loss projected?
I'm sorry, Ben. I was having a hard time understanding you. Could you repeat that?
Sorry. For this fiscal year, the initial projection on sales tax loss was only $1.5 million. Did I hear that correctly?
That's a budget to budget year. They underestimated their sales tax number last year.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it was under budget. It was a decrease on a year-to-year basis of $3 million, but
okay.
It was under budgeted last year. So there's kind of a realistic rebuild going into that number as well.
Okay, got it. I thought that was low because we have, given with the sales tax that's come in so far during the New York pause period for Buffalo schools, we would project sort of March through June a nearly $5 million shortfall. So I just want to make sure that was understood.
Thank you very much.
So this is Jeanette Jurasek, for 2021, 69 FTE will be added to the overall 69, and across the nearly 120 in staffing be taken out. Shouldn't there be a freeze on the 2021? It's 69. I'm saying 70. 69 net new FTE employees. Shouldn't there be a freeze on that? Especially in light of, in their own report, unless things go wildly the wrong way, they already have to take $116 million out in terms of personnel and staffing. So the question is, shouldn't those be frozen?
I think Jeff Pritchard is on the line if he would want to address that policy-related question. Or I don't know if we lost him. Jeff, are you still on the line?
Yes, Jeanette, I am on the line.
Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. And I don't know if everybody else heard the music that was going on with Jeanette's question. Jeanette, I'll paraphrase I'll paraphrase the question because I'm not 100%. I heard all of it, but I
oh my gosh! So it was. Did I do it?
Sure. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Well, I'm afraid my audio is not good. Jeanette Robe, you can just summarize. My audio is just not good.
No, no, I don't know if it was you, but there was some nice music playing for a moment.
Yeah.
I think
nobody takes me seriously.
Was
music wherever you go, Jeanette.
I believe the question was that the FTE count is being increased. It's being increased on a year-to-year basis in the general fund, and
for 2021.
For 2021, and should that be held flat on a year-to-year basis as opposed to increasing it? And I suspect I understand why, but I know it's policy, so I think probably it's better addressed by you.
Yeah, okay, I can answer that. And it's two things. One, the increases in FTEs that you're seeing in the 2021 year are actually positions that have been added during the 1920 year. And so we essentially, for conservatism, leave, for the 4-year plan, we leave the FTE counts flat, even though we do have, and this was issued subsequent to the 4-year plan, we do have an assumption for a reduction of approximately 57 staff positions that's in our proposed budget. So we are addressing that and understand that does need to be done. The other piece too, in our proposed budget, we do have essentially a freeze on central office positions that, when a position opens up and a request comes to fill it, we will be addressing each of those sort of individually to see if it makes sense to fill it, change it, just hold, or potentially eliminate the position. So that's one of the cost savings things that we incorporated into our proposed budget.
Thank you.
If I could mention just a couple other things too for clarification. Just the last question was about the sales tax in the 1920 year, and Jeanette Robe, I think you did answer that, but we did take into account a roughly, I think, $5 or $6 million reduction in sales tax, and as you addressed, it was really, we've historically far under budgeted sales tax, just to be conservative. So when we take that reduction out, it doesn't look to be a big reduction, but it is based on actuals. And I think you probably caught an error in the report. That $1.2 million nursing aid that we get every year, I did not include that as a recurring revenue. I failed to include that as a potential reduction in cost. So we include the cost in the plan, and I only include the revenue in the 2021 year, and then I do not include it in the future years. I had forgotten to include it as a potential cost saving, because if we don't get that aid, we might have to actually reduce the expenditures. And I know it's a small item, but I figured I just wanted to clarify that.
Jeffrey, this is Jeanette Jurasek again. I have a follow-up question to overall staffing levels. We've been working with you, and across 2 or 3 years, you developed this instrument for every 100 student out-migration of a district. You will reduce teaching FTE by 6.5. And by your own projections, you will have 1,800 fewer customers by the end of the 3-year financial plan, 1,800 fewer students, customers. So your staffing reduction, classroom staffing reduction, by your own instrument, is that what you use to come up with your reduction numbers? It seems to me you should, just based on gap closing measures, you should, separate from the corona recession, you should be taking more out of the classroom, not so?
Well, the calculation that I include in the 4-year plan is more for it's so that way I'm not double counting students, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because as more students go to charter schools, we essentially have had for 12 years a flat student population in the city of Buffalo when you add charter schools and public schools together. So in the financial plan, when we project out for 4 years and show that we have a significant growth in charter school pupils, based on, and this, we have a demographer's report that shows this as well, the growth in charter school pupils is almost exclusively from district schools. So to show an overall population increase in Buffalo, meaning holding our schools static and then growing charter schools, is really going to be double counting students that I don't believe exist. And this was my mechanism of showing for the model one way to address it. Now there is fluctuation from year to year. And also under the education bargain, one of the things that we have done, because we've had the financial wherewithal to do it, is we've put a lot of investments in the classroom over the last several years that we may not be able to do in the future and may not be able to maintain them. So it's really, that 6.5 per 100 is really just for the modeling. When we do our actual budgeting, we look at the student counts that we project in our school-based budget model, which is a completely separate process that's part of our annual budget. In this particular year, we have a roughly 300, I think probably about a 300 student drop that's budgeted in our school-based budget. And ultimately, there's more to it than that, because sometimes it depends on how, which schools the students are in and so forth. But they're somewhat separate. So one is really for this model. The other is trying to recognize that student counts are going to drop for Buffalo schools, and you'll see that in our budget. The budget that we're asking our board to approve does request the essentially the ending of 3 programs that exist right now. So 3 separate school-based budgets that we're projecting, or we're recommending that we close. So this is sort of, in order to show those changes in the budget, you almost need to have sort of a year like this where we have a gap and it becomes clear that we have to start addressing it and have to start looking very closely at how we staff for these students.
Thank you.
If I may just interject briefly, a point of clarification. When Mr. Pritchard refers to the proposed budget, that is not the same thing as the recommended budget. The recommended budget was released May 1st, and that's what the report that you've received is based on. The proposed budget is that budget as altered and to be reviewed by the Board of Education next week. So I just wanted to have that as a point of clarification.
All right, that helps. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Clearly, it's just the beginning of the process. The uncertainty in funding is enormous. The possible cuts could be catastrophic, most particularly given the gap in learning that's occurred this year with respect to, I'm sure, many students. Beginning to address that gap under budgetary conditions like this beggars the mind. We're certainly available to help, but I'm afraid our help is rather limited when it comes to problems of this dimension. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Pritchard. We're now going to turn to the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency Financial Plan and Third Quarter Review. We'll look at the 2021 proposed budget and related four-year financial plan, along with a brief summary of the third quarter report. Any changes made to the budget and financial plan pursuant to approval by Bureau's Board of Directors will be reviewed at our June board meeting. An individual report on each item has been provided to you under tab 3 of your board book. Bryce has prepared an overview of these items for us. Bryce, please begin.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair. This is Bryce Link. I will begin our presentation with the Bureau third quarter report, which is slide 39 of the overall presentation. Moving on to slide 40, this is just the snapshot of the program year 45 entitlement grants. $18.7 million in total received. $9.3 million of that is being administered by Bureau. The balance of $9.5 is administered by the City of Buffalo. A couple of things I just want to point out there. All home funding is administered by Bureau, whereas the emergency shelter grants, ESG, and housing opportunities for people with AIDS, HOPWA, both those programs are administered through the City of Buffalo since they deal directly with the subrecipients that receive the funds. Moving on to slide 41, we have a comparison of the revenues and expenditures budget as of third quarter to actual expenditures. To date, or as of March 30th, revenue was at $9.6 million, approximately $1.2 million below what was budgeted for. That's largely related to CDBG funds, whereas expenditures, the variance there between budget and actuals was about $45,000. Revenues do exceed expenditures as of the end of the third quarter. And as you're aware, at the end of the fiscal year, Bureau is able to reconcile differences and close out different projects that are ongoing and balance out revenues to expenditures. So as of the third quarter, there was no concern with the revenues and expenditures for Bureau. A couple things to point out. During this current pandemic, Bureau, since affordable housing is considered essential, has been able to move forward and continue with its projects. The staff are working remotely. They have some practices in place to protect those staff that go on the field. They're issued their personal protective equipment. I apologize that wasn't part of the presentation, but I wanted to make sure we touched upon that. As was said before, Bureau is dependent on HUD funding. Any future decreases would place additional stress on operations. Current year HUD award is consistent with prior year amounts. In addition to the entitlement funds, Bureau staff have been going out and identifying outside grants that they can utilize for operations and specific targeted programming. Some of the major ones would be the Evans Bank Fund. Total award was $475,000, $30,000 of that's included in the current year. The Local Initiative Support Corporation, LISC, grant was for $350,000. There is $87,500 in the current year. And a new program, a new grant source that they've been able to tap into is the Enterprise New York City's RISE program. They've received up to $1 million in grant funding for that program, which we'll see in the out years of the upcoming financial plan. But in the current year, $80,000 is budgeted. Moving on to slide 43. The current collective bargaining
Bryce,
agreement.
can you speak a little bit louder or more? And I can hardly hear you.
Yes, sir. Collective bargaining agreement with CSE expires June 30th, 2020. So it's the end of the current fiscal year. Due to the recent, well, there has been no update in regards to the FBI and IRS raid this past spring. However, there has been no restrictions placed on operations of Bureau. They're able to draw down funding as needed. Bureau received notice that the 2021 entitlement grants will be consistent with the current year amounts. As I previously mentioned, Bureau has continued to operate during the pandemic. Affordable housing is deemed essential, and construction has continued with proper safety equipment and procedures in place. Staff working remotely, and there's been minor expenses of approximately $3,000 incurred to date, and there's a possible FEMA reimbursement for those costs. Subrecipient awards and payment requests are being processed. Bureau is currently working with the city administration to implement a return-to-work program. They will be following the city's recommendation of reducing their footprint of 40% in the office as well once they return to general operations. That is what I have in regards to the third quarter report. Are there any questions at this time? Hearing no questions, I'll move on to the Bureau 2021-2024 financial plan, which begins on slide 44. A quick overview of the 2021-2024 financial plan. Bureau operations are expected to continue with no planned stoppage of work. As it was already mentioned, affordable housing is deemed essential, and construction work has continued. Bureau received the Year 46 Entitlement Funds Award notice from HUD on March 30th, 2020. It's an actual increase of $735,650 in entitlement funds when compared to the 2019-20 budget. Bureau was conservative in budgeting its revenues over the financial plan, with an increase of 1.9% in fiscal year 21-22, a decrease of 4.3% in 2022-23, and then held flat in fiscal year 23-24. Subrecipients receive approximately $700,000 a year from Bureau as a direct pass-through. Slide 46 is the breakout of the Year 46 entitlement funds. In total, the city and Bureau will be receiving $19.4 million in entitlement funds. Approximately $10 million will be administered by Bureau, and the balance of $9.4 million will be administered by the city of Buffalo. Slide 47 is a comparison of 2019-20 to 2021 entitlement funding. In total, entitlement funding is increasing 3.9% year to year, or $735,600. For Bureau, the two significant pieces is an increase to the Community Development Block Grant, approximately $336,000, and then home funding in the amount of $335,000. Now, HOPWA is increasing by almost $406,000, but that is administered by the city of Buffalo, and then the emergency shelter grants are being reduced by $341,000. Slide 48. The Bureau financial plan is reflective of all known and estimated revenues, including entitlement funds, program income, and additional grants. As I mentioned during the third quarter report, Bureau staff have been looking for, applying, and receiving grants from outside sources, primarily the Evans Fund, LISC, Cities Rise, It also the financial plan includes resources in the first 3 years of the financial plan for negotiating a labor agreement between Bureau and local CSE 815. The current CBA expires at the end of this fiscal year. And Bureau includes separate projections for salaries and fringe benefits. Slide 49. This is a summary of revenues and expenses over the 4 years. Revenues go from $12.7 million in fiscal year 2021 and are reduced down to $12.3 million in fiscal year 23-24. Expenditures match revenues under this financial plan. The major revenue sources, CDBG and home, are kept fairly flat over the 4 years of the financial plan. And it's really the other income, the other grants, where you see in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22, where there's an increase. Those are non-recurring grants, so Bureau has budgeted for them in those 2 years, and there's corresponding expenditures under program costs in those 2 years as well. The financial plan is balanced over the 4 years. Any revenue in excess of expenditures is rolled forward into future years. As you're aware, Bureau normally starts their fiscal year drawing down prior year entitlement grant funds prior to receiving the new current year entitlement funds. Moving on to slide 50. This is a high-level breakdown of the CDBG and home funding for Bureau this year, or for 2021. CDBG has been budgeted in the amount of $7.6 million. $4.6 million of that's for program delivery. Of that $4.6 million, $3.1 is for emergency loan program. $1.3 million is for program delivery costs, and then there's $200,000 for crime prevention. In addition, there is $3 million for administrative costs. Home funding was budgeted at $3.9 million. 3.6 of the home is for home program delivery. $3 million is for rehabilitation and new construction. $500,000 is for community housing development organizations, and $100,000 for home program delivery, which leaves a balance of approximately $300,000 for administrative costs. One thing I want to point out, both the CDBG and home includes, these amounts include what they receive from program income, and in regards to CDBG, some of their rental income. So that 7.6, you have to, if you go back to the budget, you'll have to add up a few lines to get to that 7.6 million. But it's a true accounting of the various forms of CDBG, either entitlement funds, program income, or rental income coming back to Bureau. Moving on to slide 51, this is just a high-level breakout of their administrative costs. Bureau is limited to certain maximum percent of the grant award each year. So for CDBG, they can use 20% of the CDBG award plus program income, and then home funding, the cap is 10%. Program delivery personnel service costs are not included in these limits. Moving on to slide 52, other notable items for Bureau. There are additional grants were received by Bureau and are now reflected in the budget and financial plan. Bureau continues to look for new revenues, and they've been successful over the last few years, as we see in their 4-year financial plan. Bureau is including prior year allocations as a current year resource for CDBG and home funds. The revenue forecast is conservative in the out years. There is adequate funding for administrative costs. Slide 53. Bureau does not participate in the City of Buffalo's self-funding of health insurance and continues to maintain coverage through Blue Cross Blue Shield. The annual increase over the 4 years of the financial plan is 7%. Currently, Bureau is holding 36 properties valued at $3.2 million. The intent is to continue to strategically assess our portfolio and sell properties and make investments where it makes sense. And the neighborhood framework plan is still ongoing. This allows multiple stakeholders to come together and work with each other on agreed upon housing goals and objectives. Slide 54, Bureau's financial or staffing model over the financial plan is held flat at 39 FTEs, full-time equivalents. Currently, there are 30 positions filled. Conclusions in regards to the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency's financial plan. The 2021-2024 financial plan is balanced. Key underlinings. Yes.
Bryce, this is Jeanette. I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mind if I cover the conclusion slides?
Absolutely. I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you. So first, I just want to thank you, Bryce, for your summary on the review and the analysis of Borough's financial plan. As Bryce indicated, the 21-24 financial plan is balanced. They're a different type of entity in that they're limited to spending what they receive in federal grants. The key underlying assumption used over the financial plan is that entitlement funds will increase 2% annually. The level of grant funding is monitored annually by borough management, and any future decreases would create financial pressures and subsequent budget reductions. As expenditures are limited to revenues, borough management will need to continue to monitor these awards and plan for the potential reduction of such awards by prioritizing projects and projecting staffing needs based on available funding. It's important to note that the 2020 census is currently being conducted. There was a drop in funding as a result of the last census. I did read that the census results are expected to be more favorable in terms of overall count, but it all depends on how the city shakes out, so to speak, compared to other localities. I do hear a little bit of feedback. If everybody can look at their phones and just make sure they have them muted, that would be helpful. Thank you. Let's see. So the 2020 census is currently being conducted. Impact will be known after results are issued. And in the event future funding resources are reduced, borough will need to shift priorities, with such policy being determined by the borough board of directors. Moving on to the final slide for the borough review. Borough has excluded federal stimulus dollars from the financial plan. The first portion of the CARES Act did provide additional CDBG funding for organizations such as Borough that assist with housing needs and development needs. It's currently unknown if this funding increase will go to Borough or if it will go to the city, depending on how the subrecipient agreement is managed and where the funding should flow based on those agreements. So it has been excluded. The amount is not known at this time either. But it could be a positive. It won't be a negative. Business operations have not been greatly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, as Borough is considered an essential service under the New York State pause order. Bryce had mentioned this. Construction has been continuing during this last few months. The financial plan assumes that there is no change in the timetable of projects that are currently ongoing and are included in your report, but there could be an impact that would need future revisions and evaluation, and that, of course, would occur in the future as more information is available. And that summarizes the conclusions on the Borough financial plan. I will open the floor to any questions, or I probably should just turn it back to Chair Olson to see if there's any questions.
Yes, this is Ben Swannekamp for the county. We did get a breakdown sheet from the feds for our own HUD money, and they did list Buffalo on there. with three chunks of, I think it's locked in formulas for Buffalo with $8.2 million in CDBG CV1, $4.1 million in ESGV CV funding, and $119,000 in HOPWA funding. So I don't know. We were on the impression that these were final amounts for the awards.
That's very helpful. Thank you. We weren't able to get our hands on what those amounts would be. So thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I can. I'll email this to Nikita. If that works.
Great. That would be perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Olson, I may have. You might still be on mute.
Yes, I am. Even a phone conference is beyond my technical abilities. We'll now move to a review of the final 2020-21 budget and financial plan of the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority. We'll also briefly review the third quarter report. The BFSA reports on both of these items have been submitted to you under tab 4 of your board book. Nathan has prepared an overview on these items and will provide them to us. I'll pass it over to Nathan.
Thank you, Chair Olson. I'm starting on slide number 58. The following is a review of BMHA's fiscal year 19-20 third quarter financial results. Slide 59. As an introduction, BMHA issued its third quarter report covering July 1st, 2019, all the way through March 31st, 2020. In this report, it shows year-to-date revenues of $36.4 million or $76.5 million of budget, so in essence, higher than budget to date. Expenses were also higher than year-to-date at $35 million. BMHA noted a favorable revenue budgetary variance of $0.6 million and an unfavorable budgetary variance for expenses of $100,000 at March 31st, 2020, as compared to the modified budget. There's been several, this is slide number 60. There have been several significant events that have impacted BMHA's fiscal year. On January 30th, 2020, BMHA amended its adopted budget and financial plan. The adopted budget increased revenues from $46.7 million to $47.6 million. This included $800,000 of additional HUD subsidy and additional HUD funding of $100,000 for the Housing Choice Voucher income. Budgeted expenditures were increased as well by $100,000 from $46.2 million to $46.3 million to reflect one additional executive level white collar employee that was budgeted and then filled. The adopted staffing plan therefore increased by this one position from 157 full-time equivalent employees to 158. Slide 61. The next significant event, of course, which has been discussed throughout this meeting, has been the impact of the pandemic. The governor issued the pause order on March 7th, 2020, declaring a disaster emergency in the state of New York as a response to this pandemic. The impact on BMHA is as follows. At April 30th, 2020, 25% of BMHA residents authority-wide had not paid rent for the month of April. This was roughly $300,000, and based on BMHA's estimates, if that amount of unpaid rent in April continued throughout the year and becomes a trend, it would impact them by about $100 million of less dwelling income by the end of the fourth quarter. And then the next major event that occurred was on March 27th, 2020, when the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or CARES Act, was signed into law. The CARES Act increased HUD funding, increased the Public Housing Operating Fund by an additional $685 million. The impact for BMHA would be an additional $2.8 million. This is anticipated to be received in the 2021 fiscal year. The announcement was made at the end of April. Slide 62 is a quick overview of BMHA's consolidated revenues. It shows the original adopted budget, how it was modified, the budget to date amounts, and then the actual receipts at March 31st, 2020. Overall, revenue exceeds modified budget by $600,000. The subsidy, the HUD subsidy, is $900,000 greater than the modified budget. And as I just mentioned, the modified budget included additional HUD subsidy. This is HUD subsidy on top of the amount that was included in the modified. So $1.7 million over the original budget and $900,000 over the modified budget. Net dwelling income was unfavorable by $200,000. As we mentioned, that's significant development. If that continues, that could be as high as 1.2 by the end of the fiscal year. Slide 63. This is a table depicting consolidated expenditures. Consolidated expenditures, including all four budgets combined, were $35 million at March 31st, 2020. The variance was minus $100,000. It was over by $100,000. Okay, the next slide here, slide number 64. Slide 64 shows budgeted versus actual employees. The adopted budget includes 158 employees. The actual fill was only 10 lower than that at March 31st. We've seen this decrease over the fiscal year. The current vacancy rate is only about 6.7% with 10 positions that are vacant, 6 of which are within asset management. It's a pretty low vacancy rate as compared to their historical, which is anywhere from 10 to 15%. Slide 65. In conclusion, all of BMHA's net dwelling revenue was unfavorable by $200,000. This is a direct result of the pandemic and the current economic downturn. A lot of rent that would typically be received is not received, and the hope is that this does not become a trend because it would impact BMHA's finances. Most of the favorable budgetary variances and expenses noted were just basically due to seasonality and the timing of payment. There would be a little bit there from the vacant positions over the fiscal year, and so employee compensation and benefits would be less than budget. And that concludes the overview of the 1920 third quarter financial results. If there are no questions, I can move on to slide 66, the overview of the budget and financial plan. I heard a response, but I couldn't hear what the person said. Can you repeat that, please?
I don't think it was a question for you, Nathan. I think you can probably go into the review of the for your financial plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Slide number 66. The following is a review of BMHA's fiscal year 2021 adopted budget and 21-24 adopted financial plan. Slide 67. The consolidated adopted budget and consolidated financial plan was submitted to the BFSA on May 1st. These documents include the combined 22 AMPs, the central office cost center, the Marine Drive apartments, and the HUD Housing Choice Voucher Program. All of the individual budgets and financial plans were provided for us, as well as all of the plans in a consolidated format. Slide number 68. And these are the economic factors impacting BMHA's adopted budget and financial plan. The first of which is the congressional approval of HUD funding. The second being the local inflationary, recessionary, and unemployment trends that affect the residents' income and the number of eligible residents. As a result of the economic downturn, presumably there are people receiving less income from either having their employment reduced or being laid off, furloughed, or out of work. So that would be a significant impact to their budget and financial plan. There's also the uncertainty regarding the impact of the pandemic on BMHA's operations and the financial performance, as well as on the tenants, the employees, and the vendors. The final economic factor impacting the budget and financial plan is, of course, the CARES Act, which CARES Act 1.0 increased both the operating subsidy and the Section 8 funding. Slide number 69. I'm sorry, could all this stop? I heard talking, but I couldn't understand if it was a question or whether it was just background. I didn't want to miss a question.
Background, Nathan.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Slide 69 is this is the financial plan on a consolidated summary. And so what's included here is the 1920 adopted budget compared with the 2021 adopted budget and each out year of the financial plan. The adopted budget includes $48.8 million of revenues, $47 million of expenses, for net income of $1.8 million prior to the payment of debt service. When debt service is factored in, the 1.8 is reduced to 0, and then finally the cash impact after removal of the non-cash OPEB accrual, not the actual payments made out on the behalf of retired employees for their health care. This is the accrual that it's included within expenses, not actually paid because it's a non-cash, and then backed out. So it's $1.3 million in 2021. Overall, each fiscal year shows on a consolidated basis net operating income. Combined, it's $11.2 million. And then when factoring in the debt service and factoring out the OPEB accrual, BMHA's consolidated summary included $9.1 million of cash impact. There's a note on this that what was submitted included $1.8 million annually for debt service for BMHA. Their actual debt service is only one year. It increases over the financial plan. So what you're seeing on the slide and within the report is as it was provided by BMHA, but we're noting that there would be a cumulative $800,000 additional debt service payment in the 3 out years on a combined basis. Slide number 70. This is a table depicting the consolidated 21-24 financial plan revenues. Revenues are included at $48.8 million in 2021. They increased $3.3 million or 6.8% over the financial plan. There is considerable amount of growth within the HUD subsidy. It increases $1.7 million or 9.3%. In that line is the HUD Housing Choice Vouchers at $6.4 million. I mentioned earlier that there was additional CARES funding for the voucher program. The additional funding for the subsidy is included within the budget. The additional funding for the vouchers has not been, as it had not been quantified at the issuance of this report. So it is included for the subsidy. It is not included for the vouchers, but we know that there will be additional funding available for BMHA for the voucher program. Slide number 71. This is a different way that the financial plan has been demonstrated in the past. We took a look at it on a consolidated basis, but we also wanted to take a look at the individual units. So of the total revenues, it's broken out here by individual budget. you can see that the AMP budget, the 22 federal units, are the bulk of the total revenues at $33.3 million. COCC is 4.8. Marine Drive accounts for 3.4 million of total revenues, whereas the Section 8 Housing Choice Vouchers are 7.3 million. And then later on in the presentation, we'll take a look at each individual's financial plan, each individual budgets. Slide number 72. We show the consolidated 2021 financial plan revenues. These are the expenses. Expenses start at $47 million in fiscal year 21. This is at a level that is lower than that fiscal year's revenues, and so there's net operating income. Expenses increase $1.3 million, or close to 3% over the financial plan. Included within that, in the first 3 fiscal years, is a 2% employee increase based on their current contract. The contracts are current through June 30th, 2023. That 2% is assumed in fiscal year 23-24 as well. So that's built into the financial plan as well. Slide number 73. Again, this is the consolidated financial plan, this time by unit. So you could see that the individual budgets where the expenses are. As with revenues, the bulk of BMHA's total expenses are with the AMPS at $31.4 million. Slide 74. This slide includes a depiction of the 1920 adopted budget staffing count. It shows where it was at as well at March 31st at the end of the third quarter. And then the major change is that there's 2 additional budgeted employees from a year ago till now. The total number of budgeted employees is 159 in 2021. It's static across the 4 years of the financial plan at the same amount. Total employee salaries and benefits are budgeted at $13.7 million within the 2021 budget. They're projected to increase about $500,000 to $14.2 million over the financial plan, again, based on contracts that are current right now, as well as 2 additional employees. And a note on this is that the final out year is an assumption that the contract will be settled and include roughly the same terms that the current contract has for employee compensation. Slide number 75. Okay, as mentioned, we took a deeper dive and looked at each individual budget and broke it out individually here. So this slide depicts the asset management program's 21-24 financial plan. Total revenues exceed total expenses by $1.9 million. Of the $1.8 million of debt service, $1.5 is strictly for the AMPS, for the 21 different housing units facilities. For the AMPS, the cash impact after the removal of the non-cash OPEB is $1.1 million in 2021 and an overall $6.6 million. Slide 76, this is the cost center breakout for fiscal year 21 through 24. Fiscal year 2021 shows that revenues exceed expenses by $100,000. There is no debt service for the COCC. However, when you back in the OPEB accrual, the cash impact is $400,000, and then over the combined basis over the 4 years, it's $600,000. Slide 77 depicts Marine Drive's budget and financial plan. BMHA took over management of Marine Drive back in February of 2011. The 2021 adopted budget shows $0 of operating income. However, there is debt service for Marine Drive of $300,000. Now, after you factor in $100,000 of OPEB accrual, there is a projected cash impact of a minus $200,000 in the 2021 adopted budget. Over the financial plan, it's as high as $300,000. If losses occur from Marine Drive, they can receive cash flow assistance from the COCC, either through reserves or through the active budget. However, reductions in non-fixed expenses would have to be considered for them to balance overall. This is of particular concern because of the issue going on with the rent, where there's a substantial amount of rent that has not been paid. Marine Drive revenues increased from $2.9 million in 1920 up to $3.4 in 2021. If that doesn't actualize, then there could be a significant issue here with Marine Drive.
I didn't feel any increase.
Well, it feels nicer outside without in the sun. I wonder if something just happened on this or not.
Before I proceed, could I just ask that everyone mutes, please? Because I'm hearing a few different conversations. Thank you. Moving on to slide number 78, the final individual budget financial plan presented here is the Section 8 financial plan. Revenues are $7.4 million, or about 15% of total 2021 revenues. Expenses are just under that at $7.3 million, or 15.6% of the total expenses. The CARES Act did provide additional Section 8 funding overall for housing choice vouchers of $1.25 billion. However, we don't have a final number on how much more that will be from BMHA. It is something that we'll be keeping our eyes on. However, because it's dollars in from a grant and dollars out in housing choice vouchers, any reported surplus or deficit within Section 8 is purely temporary in nature. When their revenues increases, their expenses increase because they're giving out more housing choice vouchers. I will defer to the Executive Director for the conclusions on slide number 79, unless there are any further questions.
Thank you, Nathan. I just want to comment, too, to the folks on the line from the Housing Authority. This was a very good plan. It addressed a lot of our requests and or our recommendations that the BFSA had made in previous years, and it was a good plan in that it included some assumptions that had not necessarily been included in past years. I'm on slide number 78 if anybody's following along on that. The comment is that the BMHA's 2021-24 financial plan appears to be reasonably developed and it's balanced. In total on a consolidated basis, although I have a couple comments on individual, I'll call them business segment type of budgets. The expenses as included in the financial plan are increased based on either expected inflationary increases or if there are other known increases, those were built into the financial plan. One of the changes from what we've seen in previous years is that BMHA has included increases annually over the financial plan for collective bargaining, including in the final year, which is after the current labor contract expires, which is a more conservative and a reasonable approach to prior years where if there was no contract, the financial plan assumption was that salaries would be held flat. So that really does allow for a more reasonable review of what the real financial projections are. Moving on to the next slide. Revenues are reasonably projected over the financial plan. As Nathan mentioned, rental income may be optimistic, and it is being monitored by the Housing Authority. It is the main operating revenue source for Marine Drive, so any shortfall would require cost reduction actions and possibly either or cash loan from the central office cost center. That would certainly be addressed by BMHA management moving forward. Slide number 80, the CARES Act has provided additional HUD subsidy and Section 9 voucher grant funds. $2.8 million has been incorporated within the adopted budget and financial plan for next year. For the HUD subsidy, there is no known amount when we put the report together as to what the Section 8 voucher grants would be, but it's important to note that Section 8 doesn't have an operational impact on the BMHA other than a small administrative fee that's retained by the Housing Authority for implementing that program or administering the program. On a consolidated basis, net income is projected annually. As I mentioned, the net income cumulative is $11.2 million with a revised positive 4-year cash flow of $8.3 million. There is $5.1 million of non-cash OPEB accruals. I point this out because BMHA is the only entity that we have oversight over that's required to report the OPEB accruals as if they're an expense against revenues. All the other entities reported as a pay-on-you-go basis based on different accounting rules. So I wanted to point that out because it's relevant when we take a look at the bottom line to kind of back that out so that we're comparing apples to apples. BMHA has projected net income for the Section 8 voucher grant program on an annual basis, which represents pass-through funding for, as I mentioned, BMHA receives a small administration fee. We recommend that this segment in future financial plans, it probably would be more transparent if this segment would balance to zero as opposed to having net income that rolls forward into the consolidated plan, because it skews the expected results just a little bit. It's not material, it's just a minor recommendation. Slide 81, the central office cost center, as you might have noted when Nathan was reviewing that slide, they do have budgeted annual losses with a cumulative loss of $1.2 million projected over the next 4 years. What's causing that largely is the fact that they're close to being balanced. Their revenues are really drawn upon for those activities, but they do have to record the non-cash OPEB accrual as an expense, which is different than the other organizations. So backing that out, it's positive, but it's certainly an area that we're monitoring closely as there is a budgeted loss on a net income basis. And then the last slide involves the HUD operating subsidy. It's calculated and estimated based on a 97% proration and an occupancy rate of 95%. When the uninhabitable units are backed out, BMHA's occupancy rate approaches closer to that 95% at just under 92%. We monitor this as well. It is important to note that BMHA has historically been very conservative, or has not been very, but has historically conservatively budgeted the HUD operating subsidy in past years. So that summarizes the high-level comments on the BMHA's financial plan. I will pause at this point for any questions. Okay, thank you.
Okay. We've now completed our review of those financial plans as submitted to this authority on May 1st, with the notable exception of the City of Buffalo. A revised financial plan has been requested from the mayor to provide an alternative plan in the event that federal stimulus assistance is not provided. It is important for this authority to understand both the financial impact and the impact to the provision of services if revenues are insufficient to meet expenditures, not only in this next budget year, but in the overall financial plan. The draft resolution, as emailed separately to you, declares that the budgets and financial plans as submitted to BFSA on May 1st, 2020 for the Buffalo City School District, the Buffalo Municipal Housing Authority, and the Buffalo Urban Renewal Agency are compliant with the BFSA Act. The overall plan, however, must be deemed incomplete due to the planned submission of the revised financial plan for the City of Buffalo. The City Administration has indicated a revised plan will be submitted by this Friday, May 22nd, and this date is reflected in the resolution. May I have a motion to approve this resolution on the financial plan as submitted on May 1st?
Nils, this is Jeanette. I will ask folks to unmute their lines so that we can record the vote and the motion in a second. Thank you.
I made the motion, Jeanette.
I'll second this motion.
Should we do a roll call or?
No, all those in favor. If there's no objections, that's
okay.
Is this the vote?
No, well,
we
first
might have lost. Okay.
Okay, and I do have one question I think is important, which is clarification from the city as to what will be submitted with the revised budget.
This is Donna, and we are working on, we are assuming that we will do some kind of deficit bonding for something like this, and then do some adjustments throughout our departmental expenses to close out the remainder. It is not covered by the deficit bond.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, and we'll vote on this. First, and I'll call the roll call for myself. I vote yes. Vice Chair Jurasek?
Yes.
Secretary Arthur?
yes.
Director Floss? Absent. Mayor?
Yes.
Yes, okay. County Executive?
Yes.
Okay, passes. And we look forward to working with the city on the revised plan. I note for the record that we have entered into discussions with bond counsel and financial advisors on efforts that we might make to assist the city in meeting its financial obligations. Our final item of business is to review the City of Buffalo's third quarter report. The BFSA report on this item has been provided under tab 5, and Bryce has prepared an overview for us. Bryce, please begin.
Yes, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon. We are now up to slide 84, and we will begin the review of the City of Buffalo's third quarter 1920 third quarter report. Slide 84 is a comparison of the adopted budget to third quarter year-end projections. The adopted budget was balanced at $508.7 million. At the end of the third quarter, revenues were projected to be at $478.7 million, a reduction, an unfavorable variance of $30 million. And expenditures were projected to be $494.4 million, a favorable variance of $14.3 million. The adopted budget was balanced. However, at the end of the third quarter, there is a projected deficit of $15.7 million due to rounding, but it's more 15.65. Moving on to slide 85. What we have here is a high-level snapshot of the various revenue categories. at the time of the adopted budget, and then where the city estimates them to be at the end of the third quarter. At the end of the third quarter, they were projecting a unfavorable revenue variance of $29.9 million. Basically, every category was unfavorable at the end of the third quarter except for the earned interest income. We'll go into the detail of the various revenue categories next. So as I said, total year-end revenues are projected to be unfavorable by $29.9 million compared to the adopted budget. Largest component of that is $18.6 million under intergovernmental revenue. Of the $18.6, $11 million is attributed to the Tribal State Compact casino revenue. The city initially budgeted $11 million. They are not expecting to see any of that year-end. And in addition, a reduction of sales tax in the amount of $8.3 million. Moving on to service charges, the second largest category, they are expecting an unfavorable variance of $6 million. $2.4 million is attributed to the default mortgage fees program. $1.1 million is attributed to parking meter fees. $600,000 is attributed to the utility inspection fees. $400,000 is attributed to casino police service fees, and $1.5 million is attributed to all the remaining service fee lines. Slide 87. Moving on, under fines, the city is expecting an unfavorable variance of $2.9 million. Including $800,000 in parking fines, $500,000 attributed to permit fines, $500,000 attributed to moving violation tickets, $500,000 attributed to court fines, $400,000 was attributed to the school zone camera fines, which was a new program that was implemented this past year, and $200,000 was attributed to all other fines. Under miscellaneous revenue, there's unfavorable variance of $1.3 million. $1.1 million was attributed to the sale of capital assets, primarily to the new process of selling properties. The city, as you're aware, the city would introduce a new program this year where they'll take properties going to auction under ownership, auction them, pay off various outstanding fees, fines. That variance is approximately $1.1 million at year end. There is $900,000 unfavorable variance related to gifts and donations. There is a positive variance of $1.2 million in regards to the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, the SAFER grant. That $1.2 million, there is a corresponding increase in expenditures, though. So all the revenue are net unfavorable variance of $1.2 million at year end. Taxes by $800,000, license of permits $800,000, and then there's that favorable variance of approximately $500,000 for earned income interest. Slide 89 is another high-level snapshot of departmental and general charges. You have the adopted budget compared to the third quarter year-end projection. Looking at total departmental costs, the city is expecting a favorable variance of $7.8 million. However, the fire department is expected to be over budget by almost $3.4 million. That's a combination of bringing on the additional fire recruits for that $1.2 million corresponding SAFER grant, as well as overage and overtime. Down under general charges, the city is expecting a favorable variance of $6.5 million, primarily through fringe benefits, close to $7.7 million, utilities at $1.5 million, and then a negative variance in other for litigation costs. So at the end of the third quarter, the city is projecting a favorable expenditure variance of $14.3 million. So as I mentioned, under departmental expenditures, favorable variance of $7.8 million, fire department exceeds the adopted budget amount by $3.4 million. The remaining 14 departments are projected to have a favorable budget variance of 11.2. Primarily, $4.8 million is attributed to the police department, $1.8 million to public works, $1.2 million to human resources, $800,000 under administration and finance, and the remaining departments a favorable variance of $2.6 million. Moving on to general charges, as I previously mentioned, the favorable variance at year-end is $6.5 million. Under fringe benefits, the favorable variance is $8.2 million. Combined pension contributions for the employee retirement system and the fire and police retirement system total $3.2 million. Health insurance combined is projected to be $2.7 million favorable year-end. And then $500,000 favorable variance for duty disability salaries, $400,000 favorable variance for employer payroll taxes, $400,000 favorable variance for workers' compensation. There was a $4.3 million unfavorable variance in other category, and that was attributed to settlement of litigation. Utilities are favorable by $1.5 million. There is a $700,000 favorable variance in grants and aid, and $300,000 favorable variance in debt service. The city did not need to issue a RAND during the current fiscal year. However, they did budget for it, so that's why there's a positive variance there. And there is no projected variance for transfers out. Slide 92 looks at city employment levels. The adopted budget amount of FTEs was 2,682 FTEs. At the end of the third quarter, that amount totaled 2,512 filled positions. So there was a vacancy rate of 170 FTEs, or approximately 6.3%. Drilling down a bit, you'll see that both police and fire added to their ranks this past spring. They filled 762 out of the 798 budgeted police positions. So currently there's a 36 FTE vacancy rate, or 4.5%. And then under fire, they're filled at 741. So there's only one vacancy in the fire department at this time. Now, both the filled rates include individuals that are currently in the academy, their respective academy, be it police or fire. So those individuals are not deployable to the field at this time, but they do count towards the FTE counts. Moving on to slide 93, conclusions and recommendations. Considering the pandemic and resulting fiscal uncertainties, BFSA recommends the financial impact be monitored. Steps are to be taken as appropriate to manage this financial impact. The Tribal State Compact revenue was budgeted at $11 million. It is not included in the year-end projection as revenue. However, the arbitration panel did find in favor of New York State. And the release of the funds to the city is expected at some point. Timing of release of these funds is unknown, though. And in total, over the last couple of years, it's estimated to be a total of $20.5 million that is due to the city of Buffalo. You may remember this past year, $7.5 million was advanced to the city of Buffalo at the end of fiscal year 2019. Moving on to slide 94, we have a breakout of the fund balance as of July 1, 2019 by major category. In total, fund balance was $92.9 million. 29.6 of that is non-spendable. $11.8 million is restricted. $38.5 million is committed. Now, that's also known as the rainy day fund. And then there's $13 million attributed to assigned. With a projected year-end deficit of $15.6 million, if the city was to draw down on available fund balance to close that deficit out, you'll see they have nothing available through unassigned. So the first category they would tap into would be assigned at $13 million, then the committed amount of $2.6 million. So the estimated balance for June 30th, 2020 in total will be $77.3 million, which would look, as you can see on the graph, 0 on unassigned, 0 on assigned, and $35.9 million in committed. No changes to non-spendable or restricted, both at $29.6 and $11.8 million, respectively. As previously noted, there is a favorable variance projected for expenditures of $14.3 million at year-end. Most significant variance was in the fire department, and the BFSA recommends the city assess the projected expenditures in the current financial plan and adjust the new financial plan as appropriate to reflect those changes. And that brings me to the end of the third quarter review.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or comments for staff or representatives of the city? Okay. I would just like to add that I would request that the directors remain flexible in their schedules, as there clearly are significant uncertainties with respect to particularly the city's budget and correspondingly the district's budget in the out years, and so we need to be flexible in terms of continuing to meet as necessary. Is there any new business? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Oh,
okay.
Well, okay. Well, that's all right. I had a macro. This is Jeanette. I had a macro question, and of course I had my mute on. But I think we were just about breaking up. We were ending the meeting, so I know we'll be talking again. So I'll just postpone that question.
Okay. All in favor of adjournment? All right.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, by consensus. Thank you very much. That concludes our meeting for today.